Hey everybody, we're here with Jamin Asay today. Maybe you could say a little bit about who you are and the kind of work you do first.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm a professor of philosophy at Purdue University, and I work in the areas of metaphysics and philosophy of language and philosophy of science, and particularly I've focused largely on the topic of truth and how truth is an important notion in lots of philosophical areas, how it connects to areas in ethics, in science, metaphysics, and kind of all around philosophy. So I'm interested in what truth is and how it's connected to other important concepts that we're interested in. And I'm also just interested in truth for its own sake and what it is, what's the best way to think about it, and how we should understand its connection to reality. So I think much of my work revolves around those main central themes.
Perfect. So yeah, today we are gonna try and get a little bit clearer about this notion of truth and related notions like truth making and how they kind of come together or maybe even come apart. So maybe it's worth saying a little bit about when we're first sort of stepping into this debate, there are kind of some main theories of what truth is supposed to even be. Um, so I take it that two main ones today, I think, are kind of what are known as the correspondence theory. And then there's people that want to kind of step away from that kind of theory because it has, they think, too much sort of metaphysical baggage. They want to kind of deflate the notion of truth. There's some other views too, like pragmatism. But when we're just trying to step into this for the first time and think about truth, maybe it's worth just sort of setting up a little bit what the kind of traditional theories want to say about this, maybe.
Yeah, so I think a theory that lots of people are going to start with is this idea that truth should be best understood as something like correspondence to reality. So if you ask someone like, what do you mean by something being true? You might say, well, it kind of matches the way that the world is. So is it uh, it's true that most of Canada is to the north of the United States. If you say, what does it mean to say that's true? Well, like you can say, well, that's the way the world actually is. Here's these two countries. They are geographically located in such a way that one of them is to the north of the other one. So that's why it's true because the world is that way. So you take that idea that, well, things are true when they match the way the world is, and they're false when they don't match the way the world is. And then so from that basic idea, then you think, well, okay, what it is to be true then is to stand in some kind of matching relationship to the world. So if you're now giving a theory of truth, you want to say a lot more about those basic ideas. So if you got something that's true, you want to say, well, what is it in the world that it is trying to actually correspond to? Because not all truths are about everything in reality. So, what is it about the world that's relevant to any particular truth? And then, what is that matching relationship? What is it for a truth, like a sentence or a belief? What is it for that thing to match a different kind of thing, like something out there in the world? So, then to the project of giving a correspondence theory of truth is giving a philosophically robust account of what truths are, what they correspond to in reality, and what the nature of that correspondence relationship is. So, so here you have a big traditional philosophical project of trying to flesh out those basic theoretical components, each of which is driven by, I think, just a kind of basic intuitive idea that, well, the true things are the things that match reality, and the false things are the ones that don't match reality. Right? That's kind of a basic insight that everybody can agree on. And then a correspondence theorist wants to put some meat on those bones and try to give an actual robust account of what all those ideas really come down to. So that's how I understand the correspondence theory is trying to really put a philosophically interesting, substantive view on top of a pretty intuitive, basic idea about a very basic kind of concept that we use every day.
Right. So maybe it's well, maybe we'll come back to it. I want to really try and disentangle this from um, truth making, but maybe it makes more sense to step into that once we've talked a little bit about deflationism. So I take it that a sort of rival view is what's called deflationism about truth. Um, so maybe we can work a little bit harder on trying to disentangle some of the issues here, but let's maybe spend a little bit of time just laying out what the deflationist is trying to do, and then maybe we can sort of circle back.
Yeah, so and yeah, I think the disentangling is has been at the forefront of my research interest from the very beginning. So I have lots of ideas about how these things get tangled and disentangled, and that's I think one of the big themes of what we're going to be talking about today. But I think deflationary theories um, they they start off by listening to the kind of thing that I just said a minute ago, and they say like, well, I like where you started. That seemed right. But then you went on to give this really robust philosophical theory and that stuff, you didn't really need to do all that. You were you said the stuff at the beginning and like that was pretty good and that was kind of all you needed to say. So that's how I understand the basic deflationary idea, which is something like truth's a great notion, but you don't actually need a real big robust theory to understand what it is. And so a lot of motivation for deflationism comes from, at least the motivations I take for it personally, it comes from looking at the most basic uses that we use the language of truth and falsity, especially when we're not even doing any philosophy. We're just like living our lives. So uh, I think a super basic example of this is like doing a true false quiz, right? Which you my kids do this in elementary school. So the teacher writes down a sentence and then the quiz says, is it true or is it false? And second graders don't need to raise their hand and say like, well, what do you mean by true here? Like what kind of theory of truth are you asking us to be evaluating here? Like that's not what they're doing. They know very easily how to deal with it. So so you could say, okay, here's the pop quiz. The Declaration of Independence was signed in 1774. True or false? Right. Once you're a few years old, you know how to answer that question. You know that if the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1774, then that sentence is true. And if the Declaration of Independence was not signed in 1774, then the sentence is false. That's all you need to know. So, what did the sentence say? If the world is like that, it's true. If the world is not like that, then it's false. And so a deflationist says, pay attention to that right there. What is it for the sentence? The Declaration of Independence was signed in 1774 to be true. Well, it's just for the Declaration of Independence to be signed in 1774. That didn't happen, so it's not true. So they're going to say, well, here's the big kind of boring insight here. Just take a shorter truth here. Take the sentence 2 + 2 = 4. Well, the sentence 2 + 2 = 4 is true if and only if 2 + 2 is 4. And the sentence grass is green, that's true just in case grass is green. And uh, oxygen is heavier than hydrogen. That's true if and only if oxygen is heavier than hydrogen. So the deflationist says, well, look, there's nothing that interesting about truth here. I'm just rattling off all these examples off the top of my head, and uh, all there is to say about what's true is just to say the very thing that we started with. So this gets expressed in lots of different ways. So one way this is famously put sometimes is that um, truth isn't adding anything to our thoughts when we predicate truth to something. So let me give you another example here. So let's say um, I'm talking with a friend. We're trying to figure out um, what restaurant we're going to go to for dinner. And so we're debating it and we're thinking about these different restaurants in town. I'm trying to figure out what to do. And I say something like, oh, when we went, the service was really bad at that restaurant down on Main Street that we went to last week. So maybe we shouldn't go there. And my friend might say, oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, let's go somewhere else. So when my friend says that's true, they weren't really commenting on what I said. What they were doing is they were effectively just putting that out on the table again. They were saying it themselves without having to actually say all those words again. And it almost some philosophers put it something like it almost kind of functions like a pronoun right there. Like where you say, Mary had a little lamb. She lives in Tennessee. Like, you know who the she is. The she is referring back to Mary. So she is there. What it means in that instance is whatever its referent was from before. And that's kind of how truth can work too. If I say that restaurant was really bad, and you can say that's true. You could have said that restaurant was really bad, but you can use the word true to basically say exactly what I just said without having to repeat the words all over again. So I think that's so when you say something's true, in a sense, you're not contributing or furthering the conversation. For example, so just to give a contrast to that, if I said, yeah, that restaurant on Main Street was really bad last night, you might say, oh, what you just said, someone else said that too. Like you can comment further on what I said, like, oh, well, I disagree with that, or my friend disagrees with that, or that's not what people on Reddit say. Like you can comment on what I said, but if you just say that's true, you effectively have just said what I said and thereby agreed with me. So the thought here is that the role of truth here is not to like describe what we're saying. It's not to identify some important property of what we're saying. It's just a way of like saying again what's already been said in a more convenient way. And so the theorists of truth are interested in like all the different linguistic things we can do with our word for truth. And that's what much of deflationary theory is it's saying like, here's all the different things we can do because we have this word in our language. But don't think that, but like, this is the project. This is the project of like showing how we can use this word in our language to enable certain kinds of expressive conveniences. It lets us say things easier than we could say otherwise. But but there's no like metaphysical philosophical project here. We don't need to explain what this property of truth is because every sentence tells you what its truth is. What is it for it to be true that snow is white? Well, snow needs to be white. What needs it to be true that it's that is 2026 right now? Well, for that to be true, it just needs to be 2026. So every sentence, in effect, tells you what it is for that thing to be true. You don't need some further theory that explains what all truths have in common. So deflationists might be happy to say things like, yeah, truths correspond to reality. Sure. My belief that 2 plus 2 is 4 is true just in case 2 plus 2 is 4. And that's all you need to know. So that's why I feel like deflationists, they agree with that initial insight, but then don't think you need to give this substantive philosophical theory about the nature of the property of truth to go along with it.
Right. And so this is where I take it that the issues here get sort of subtle, because I guess I have a hard time myself even trying to figure out, so to set a little bit more, so when we're talking about like because you're happy to sign on to something called truth makers. So there are
Yeah.
things that, if something's true, at least a lot of the time, maybe not always, but a lot of the time, things are made true by, I think on your account, they're made true by ontological commitments. So if I say there are penguins, and it's sort of made true, I guess, by there being a penguin over there and me adding that penguin to my ontology. There's like that connection there. Um, so what I guess when I'm trying to figure out like how we're disentangling this from, correspondence theory, it just seems so natural to say that that kind of connection just that is the correspondence. And so it's like, okay, what you're saying is, yeah, that's true, but that's perfectly compatible with deflationary theory. And so I guess when I'm trying to figure out how to disentangle these things, it's like what is the correspondence theorist trying to add over and above what's been said so far?
Yeah, so you're right that it starts around here is where it starts getting pretty subtle pretty fast. But I think that's where a lot of interesting philosophy can happen, which is we kind of start with something that seems natural and intuitive to us, and then we really want to dig into like what are we really saying here? And as we've already seen, like you get vastly different philosophical programs arising from one and the same basic phenomenon, like how we think about truth and describing things as true. Okay, so go back to this use of talking about truth, like in a true false exam, or just saying to your friend, "That's true." Um, what I wanted to emphasize there is that kind of interaction where a, a content is expressed, a proposition is expressed. That snow is white, the two and two is four, that that Canada is to the north of the United States. Those are things you might say, things you might believe, things you might deny. They're these thoughts that you can have. And then the deflationary stuff was kind of starting with the noting that like you can use talk about truth to express those thoughts without having to like spell them out again. So when you say that was my favorite restaurant, I can go, that's true. And I can kind of get on the same page with what you just said. But notice that this is all, these facts I'm talking about here are facts about how we use language, facts about what we express when we use our words, things about our practices, about how we agree with one another, how we make assertions. So this is all about, this kind of is all on the level of communication, if you will. I can use true to express things that have already been expressed without stating them all over again. But notice that doesn't have anything to do with, and another way you can say it is like, well, the the deflationary theory kind of tells you like the conditions for something to be true is always like written right there into the truth. Under what conditions is it true that it's snowing? Well, under the conditions that it's snowing. That's what it takes for it to be true that it's snowing. Right, so that's the easy question, I think. But I think that leaves a whole lot of stuff open. Um, and you mentioned I think truth, there's this concept of truth making and it connects with ontology. And to me, I guess one way of thinking about it is the kind of stuff I've been talking about with deflationism is all like looking at truths, sentences, beliefs, propositions. And if somebody says one sentence, you can use true to express that exact same sentence all over again. So we can talk to each other and communicate using the word true. But then there's this other side of things, which is like, well, what explains or what makes the things that are true true, right? Because when I identify that a certain sentence is true, I haven't really told you anything about why it's true or what makes it true or what explains its truth. Um, because that's like when you're taking the true false exam, you're just trying to like lay out what are the true things. And what I want to and then what I want to launch on here is the idea that well there's a question about whether something is true and there's a question about what accounts for that truth. And I think a correspondence theorist here is going to say, well, that's where I do really well. That's where my view shines. My view shines because it's all about like explaining why things are true in the first place. And maybe the deflationist says, I already answered that question. Why is it true that snow is white? Well, because snow is white. What's so you might think there's this other question about what are the grounds of truths, perhaps? And the deflationist might say, well, truths just tell you that themselves. And the correspondence theorist says, no, there's more work to be done here. And then someone like me comes along and says, well, you're both kind of right. I think I think correspondence theorists are latching on to what I would say is like an important philosophical project. But it's a philosophical project that can be separated from the project of giving an account of the nature of truth. And so this is where I either find a way to like make everybody mad. My goal is to try to like find the truth in both perspectives, but possibly in a way that just like makes everybody unsatisfied. But that's the kind of project I'm interested in doing, which is saying something like deflationists are right about truth. Like all there is to be true is to be whatever the thing just said. But then there's this whole other story. There's this whole story about, well, what accounts for that particular fact? And that's what I think truth making is all about. Um, so let me, yeah, so you gave this example. Let's just take like a very simple example, right? Like take the sentence, there are penguins. All right, just take that sentence. Is that sentence true or is it false? Well, it's true. So, but then there's another, so then I want to say, well, there's another issue here. Like that sentence just doesn't get to be true, right? That sentence needs something. There's got to be something in the world. You know, forget about language, forget about beliefs, forget about sentences. There's stuff out there in the world independent of all that stuff. Right? There are penguins around long before there were people like us around. And that sentence that there are penguins, that thing's only true because of those birds. Those birds have to be in the world in order for that sentence to be true. Now I know this that I hope that seems totally obvious and almost trivial to point out, but the idea here is that well look, there's a relation between a sentence, right? A sentence, a piece of natural language that I'm expressing using the English language, like that sentence, there are penguins. That's a kind of thing. And then a penguin is a very different kind of thing. It's a bird, right? It's not a linguistic object. It's a bird. But those two things stand in a very important relationship to one another. So you got a sentence and a bird. And what I think the project of truth maker theory is giving an account of that relationship. That sentence and that bird stand, I think, in a very important relationship to one another. That sentence is true because that bird exists. So the truth of a sentence, in this case, is very strongly and importantly connected to the existence of a kind of thing in the world. So this is a relationship between what I would say a truth bearer, a sentence, a belief, a proposition, and a truth maker, which in this case is literally just a penguin. But the idea is there's like a truthy kind of thing, and then there's like a thing in the world. and understanding when the truth and falsity kind of things and the stuff in the world connect with each other or don't, I think that's an important philosophical project that I think is that is what I'm talking about when I talk about truth making. And that whole relationship between like the sentences that we write and the stuff out there in the world, deflationists and their theories don't talk about it at all, because deflationists keep saying the kinds of things I kept saying a little while ago, like the sentence "snow is white" is true if and only if snow is white. And what I want to note there is they're pointing out a relationship between two different sentences. There's the sentence "snow is white," and there's the sentence "snow is white" is true. But those are both sentences. And deflationists are saying, yeah, those sentences kind of come to the same thing. You can use true to kind of say the thing already that you already just said. So when you add truth to a sentence, you're not really adding anything. So some people say like truth is redundant, truth is transparent. Say it. You can say, look, it's true that I live in Indiana, or you can say I live in Indiana. Your choice, right? Same thing. It's not really any different to say it with truth in it or to say it without. But that's an observation about two different sentences, about two different linguistic things, about two different things that are in fact true, and saying that these things are kind of the same, they come to the same thing here. So what I'm interested in is in that, like these deflationary theories of truth are pointing out how certain kinds of truths are equivalent and how we can use certain kind of truths to say what other truths say. And that's kind of that's the story about truth. And then I want to say, great, but there is this other thing out here, this striking relationship between which of our sentences are true and what actually is out there in the world. And the deflationary theory doesn't really say anything about it. And so that's the view I want to push here, is something like there's two kinds of philosophical projects here. Understanding the concept of truth and how truth-like language functions in our expressive practices. And then there's this project of truth making about like, what is the connection between the things that are true and the stuff that exists in the world? So what I think deflationary theories help us see is that these are just separate projects. And deflationists are interested in the one kind of basic one about how do we use the language of truth, but they're just not interested in this metaphysical or ontological project of how all those truths end up connecting to reality. So I think deflationists just are paying attention to one and it kind of just ignoring or being silent on the other. Correspondence theorists, I think they're smashing the two projects together. And they're saying, no, well, what it is to say what truth is to give this metaphysical theory. So they're just smashing these two projects together, doing one in terms of the other. So what I want to say is, no, what we can do is we can separate them, and we should just kind of handle the two on their own terms. You don't have to smash them together. It's an option, but I think there are reasons to not go that direction. So yeah, that's a lot, but that's how I'm trying to motivate, threading this particular needle that I'm interested in.
Right. Um, so I guess where I get sort of stuck here is wondering like, because I'm pretty much on board with all of that. I guess I just wonder if what this amounts to, like if you go to the Stanford Encyclopedia article for correspondence theory, I think maybe it's on theories of truth. I don't remember, but there's an article on truth that talks about truth maker theories, and it goes so far as to just call them more liberal versions of correspondence theories, basically, just because they allow for things that maybe like the sort of older correspondence theories wouldn't. Um, so I guess what I'm wondering is like when you're thinking about truth makers, it's sort of fine, right? Like I'm perfectly happy to go along with you and say, okay, yes, truth very often does have this kind of um, linguistic sort of usefulness to it, right? It's a sort of conversational like utility thing. I think that's right. Um, but I also do want to talk about what makes things true. Um, and I don't know. I mean, if we're talking about truth makers, I mean, do you think it's right to say that basically what we're talking about here is just like a kind of liberal correspondence theory that just allows for this kind of, that it admits that truth is a kind of, linguistic device. And also there's this other thing. I don't know. I guess I'm just wondering like how substantial the difference is here between sort of what you want to say um, and I don't know, like what a more committed correspondence theorist maybe would say. I guess I'm just trying to figure out how big the disagreements here actually are between the camps.
Yeah, so I think there's at least a couple ways you can kind of motivate the different distinctions here. So to the question of like, is truth maker theory just kind of a more liberal version of correspondence? So I think I've got at least two reasons I think motivate at least resisting that idea. So one, I think, is other other traditional, robust, historically interesting theories of truth, I think can also be thought of as smashing together the project of defining truth and accounting for truth makers that are very much not correspondence theories. So one idea that I've suggested in the past is this idea that all like we didn't talk about the other kind of big historical theories of truth, normally like the coherence theories of truth, pragmatist theories of truth. And so one suggestion I've made in the past is that all of these traditional theories of truth, all these what we call now substantive theories of truth, theories that like give a real, they take that project I talked about earlier, like what is it to be true, and then what is this relationship when things are true, and then gives a real robust theory about like what all truths share in common. I think um, views like coherence theories and pragmatic theories can likewise be seen as effectively giving their own theories of truth making. So, on a coherence theory of truth, the idea is something like, well, beliefs, sentences, whatever are true, not because they like correspond to some fact in the external world, but because they share some kind of coherence relationship to each other. So why is it true that snow is white? Well, because snow's being white coheres with all these other things that you believe, like your belief that that stuff outside falling down is snow, and that your belief that things that look like this are white, and these other people's beliefs about what that stuff coming down looks like. So, coherence theorists, when you ask them, well, why are things true? There's an answer. And it's true because of these coherence relations to all these other beliefs. And so what I hear there is that's what I'm talking about. You just told me what makes this belief true. You didn't point to some snow out there in the world. You pointed to a bunch of other beliefs, and you didn't point to a correspondence relation, but you pointed to this relation of coherence between all these different beliefs. So why is this particular belief of mine true? Well, because of all these other beliefs, and because all these other beliefs stand in a particular relation. That's what makes it true. So what I see here is the coherence theorist giving us an account of truth makers. Why are beliefs true? Well, then they spell out their coherence account. So when I see the traditional coherence theory of truth, I see a theory that takes the project of defining truth, and it's got its own view about the metaphysics, about like what makes things true, and smashes them together. what it is to be true is to have this coherent relationship to other beliefs. So what do we have here? We have a robust theory of truth that is fully in for truth makers, fully committed on the question of truth maker theory, but it sure isn't a correspondence theory. In fact, it's the historical, antagonist to the correspondence theory. So this way of resisting the identification is to say other theories of truth can play this game too, and other theories of truth have been playing this game. So that's one reason to resist why correspondence and truth maker theory just aren't the same thing. Personally, I think people think that or say that kind of more for sociological and historical reasons, which is to say, like, the only truth maker theory game in town these days for most philosophers is kind of a not idealist, not coherence with some ideal set of beliefs, but like stuff out there in the world, more materialistic, physicalistic, external worldy kind of grounding for truth. I think like so to me, like there's a sociological fact is that like most people interested, most metaphysicians today, they're not idealists, they're materialists or physicalists. And they think the world is this physical stuff. And traditionally, that's been the kind of view that goes along with correspondence and not coherence or pragmatism. So I think so if you like truth maker theory and you're like a contemporary metaphysician, you're probably going to have a combined view that looks a lot like a correspondence theorist view, which was motivated from similar kinds of background philosophical commitments. So that's one reason to think like I think the church of truth maker theory is broader than just the correspondence theorists. I think other people have been playing along at the same time. And then I think a second direction for thinking about why correspondence and truth maker theory come apart from one another is thinking about certain particular examples where you might think, where the way I think about it is there are a big class of truths that if you're a correspondence theorist, you're forced to say something about their truth makers, which you're not forced to say if you aren't already a signed up committed correspondence theorist. Okay, so let me give an example here. The most famous example in this kind of situation is thinking about negative existential truths. That is to say, truths about things that don't exist. So these are interesting truths for all kinds of reasons. They've been very troublesome in the history of philosophy for all kinds of reasons. And this is just one more case where for some people's perspective, they cause a problem. From my perspective, they provide a certain kind of insight conveniently. So just here's a true claim. There are no unicorns don't exist. Right? They are a fictional, mythical creature. They're not real. Unicorns don't exist. Like that's true. Now, on my picture of what a correspondence theorist is, a correspondence theorist says, well, to understand, for something to be true, like truth just is correspondence with reality, correspondence with some fact, perhaps. That's just what truth is. So if something's true, it has to have a fact and it's got to correspond to that fact in the right way. Like if that's what the property of truth is, then it's always going to require correspondence to some fact. Like if that's your theory, then every time you encounter something true, you got to find the fact and account for the correspondence relationship to that fact. I'm saying fact here, but whatever your correspondence theory is, the basic idea is something is true when it corresponds to this. So anytime you got something true, you gotta provide the this for them to match up to. So, okay, great. Let's think about some hard cases. Let's think about something true. And I take it we all agree it's true. Unicorns don't exist. What does that correspond to? What's that fact? Go around the world, find me the fact or the thing or whatever that makes it true that there are no unicorns. And that's the challenge. Right? We started with a positive existential, the easiest case. Penguins exist. Yeah. Find me a penguin, done. Right. But if you want to do dodos exist, well, you're not going to find a dodo, right? You're not going to find one, which means it's going to be what's true is that dodos don't exist. But what makes that one true? Go find me something in the world that makes that one true. But you know what? It's not you, it's not me. There's no particular bird that makes it true that there's no dodos. It's not my coffee mug, it's not the computer, it's not the camera. Like what is it? What is the thing that actually exists that explains why this other thing doesn't exist? And that's the challenge. And it's a challenge that it's the thing that we have to find is the thing that like couldn't possibly exist while it was also true that unicorns exist or dodos exist. Um, so like we need something that currently exists now that didn't used to exist when dodos existed. But this thing is here, it's around, it's somewhere. It's the thing that the truth there are no dodos corresponds to. But what is it? And I tried to motivate here like that's not a straightforward answer. It's sure is not as easy as all these other cases. So what I want to illustrate here is this challenge is forced upon us if we are committed correspondence theorists. Because if you're a correspondence theorist, you've told me what it is to be true is to like match something out there in the world. So I gave you a truth. What does that match up with? And then that's really hard to say. So what I think is that if we can separate these philosophical projects, what's the nature of truth? What's the truth maker story for any particular truth? And so this is what in one of the papers I've written, it's what I call pure truth maker theory. What is it? It's asking questions about truth makers independently of their connection to whatever you think about the nature of truth or whatever. So it's asking the question, okay, here's something true. Unicorns don't exist. There are no more dodos. What's the right thing to say about how those things, connect to the world? And I think the most kind of motivated thing to say is like, these are cases where things are true not because of what exists in the world, but because of like things don't exist in the world, right? These things are true not because there's a thing out there that they correspond to. That's the wrong way to think about their metaphysics, their truth. These things are not true because of stuff that exists. When we think about what's the right ontological attitude, the right thing to think about is like, I want to subscribe to an ontology that doesn't have those things in it. Right? So I think that might sound kind of abstract, but the idea is like, imagine this kind of character. Someone who says, look, I believe that it's true that penguins exist, that penguins are real, that they're a real thing. And then I ask you, okay, give me an ontology, give me a list of all the things in the world. Like imagine So you've told me what you think is true. Now, like imagine you could like go um, create a little world. Like maybe, think about like you're making a virtual world, you're making a video game world or something. And you're thinking about what do I want my virtual world to be like? And you can approach it in different ways. You can approach your virtual world in things of like, what's all the stuff I'm going to put into this world? What are the landscapes? What are the planets here? What are the actual individuals I'm going to put into my virtual world? You could approach it that way. You could also approach it by thinking like, well, what do I want to be true in my world? What do I want? What are the facts in my world? What's true or false in my virtual world that I'm going to create? And so imagine someone who creates a virtual world, but thinks like this. They think, well, I want it to be true in my virtual world that there are penguins. I want that true. So if someone takes a true false test in this world, when the question, there are penguins comes on, the right answer is true. That's what I want to do. I'm going to program that into my virtual world. But here's what I don't want to do. I don't want to build any penguins in my world. No penguins there. I don't want to bother putting any penguins into my world. I just want it to be true that there are penguins in that world. I want it to be true even though there aren't any penguins. And I hope like if you heard somebody trying to program their world like that, you'd think you've messed something up here. You've misunderstood the two different ways of thinking about your world here. You can think about the world in terms of like what's in it, and you can think about your world as in terms of like what's true or false of that world. But yet those two things cannot be just like driven apart. They're deeply connected to one another. And to like think that you can have it be true, like the sentence, there are penguins, that's true. Are there any penguins? No. Forgot to make them. Like you just like that's incoherent. You can't do that. And so what I'm trying to illustrate here is the idea of like when you think about what's true in your world, whether it's the actual world, the virtual world, your programming or whatever, you got to think about, well, given what I want to be true in this world, what's got to be there? What do I got to make? If I really want to program a world where it's true that there are penguins, I'm going to have to program some penguins. Like, it's not an option. I have to do that. If I want it to be true that there are penguins, I got to make some penguins. But let's say you want it to be true in your world that there's no unicorns. What do you got to make? What do you got to make in your virtual world so that it's true that there are no unicorns? And I think the answer is you don't have to do anything. You're done. You don't have to make anything in your world to make it become true that there are no unicorns. What you have to do is not make any unicorns. So this is a very long way of trying to say like truth maker theory is this way of like cashing out this ontological reasoning that I'm trying to go through here. This connection between what's actually true and what's actually going on in the world. And if you're a correspondence theorist, you are always, always forced to every time something's true, there's got to be a thing in your world. You have to make it for any truth, no matter what that truth is. If you're a correspondence theorist, you always have to do that every time. But if you approach this, setting aside like giving a theory of truth, you can approach these issues of like, well, if this one were true, what would I need to put into my world? And if this one were true, what would I need to put, if anything, into my world? And I think what that reasoning leads to is the idea that, well, for some truths, those get to be true even though you don't have anything in your world. Like that's the right thing to say about those truths. Some truths don't correspond to something in reality. That's just like the wrong way to think about it. It's an extrapolation from other cases where that is the right idea. But I think just independently thinking through this kind of reasoning is like, well, the right ontological attitude towards these negative existential truths is that they don't have truth makers. That's the wrong way to think about them. And if that's so, truth should not be defined in terms of truth making. Those projects that smash the two things together need to be separated. So what I just argued here is that if there are some truths that don't have truth makers, so I kind of tried to motivate the idea that a negative existential doesn't have a truth maker. Nothing makes it true. If that's right, then any theory that tries to marry truth making and defining the nature of truth can't be right. Because any theory that merges the two together, there always has to be a truth maker for every truth, every time, no matter what. And so I think thinking about these cases like negative existentials shows us, oh, there's just kind of two separate projects here. There's like, let's think about truth. And you know what the deflationists say? Like, it's true that there are no unicorns if and only if there are no unicorns. I go, sounds right. They got that one right. It's true that there are no dodos if and only if there are no dodos. Yep, that's right. Like, um, and then when we ask the metaphysical question, like, well, but what does it take for those negative existentials to be true? I'm inclined to say, like, nothing, like literally nothing. They don't have truth makers. That's kind of that's what they are telling us. And so I think thinking through cases like this, having deflationism in the background as an idea is like, oh, actually, like we can kind of go with a deflationary definition or theory of like truth here. And then like we can think about the metaphysics separately without having to like have our theory of truth getting in the way. So at the end of the day, I think we can talk about truth maker theory in a way that doesn't mean we've already signed up for correspondence theory. In fact, if you sign up for correspondence theory, you are much more restricted in how you do your truth maker theory. And I think let's just like get rid of those restrictions from the outset and just think through these cases on their own terms as they are best thought of. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
lots of views on the disentangling.
Yeah. So that was actually very helpful. So yeah, I'll have to sort of sit and think about that just off the top of my head. It's going to take a little bit of time for all that to sink in, but I mean that was genuinely like very helpful and clarifying. So yeah, it was great. I guess one last sort of bit of interest here then that was showed up in the paper that I read was near the end. I guess we get to I guess you call them sort of anti-metaphysics philosophers. And I take it that you take it that they're sort of your opposition here, or at least one
Yeah.
kind of opposition. So that kind of project is one that I'm not super familiar with what they're trying to do. So maybe you can camp out a little bit of the details. Maybe not, you don't have to go, 100% here because I take it that this is a whole different kind of thing. But maybe just sort of the gist of what's going on with that camp over there.
Yeah, so I think we've laid the groundwork for that pretty well. So I think, right, so what I've been trying to defend so far is this idea that like there's a project of giving a theory of truth, and you can kind of see if like the deflationist theory about that, I'm pretty happy with. Like I think that goes a long way to demonstrating a lot of what we do when we talk about truth. So it's like I'm kind of very sympathetic to the general deflationary line about truth. Like, yeah, the story of truth is P is true if and only if P. Great. Nonetheless, I'm still interested in these metaphysical questions. I'm still a metaphysician. And I think the deflationary stuff is fine, but it doesn't the this idea that like what's in your world and what's true about your world link up. And it's interesting to think about how they link up, even if you're not like giving a theory of truth. So to me, it's like two projects and they're both interesting. Let's do it. So I wrote my first book was on the nature of truth, and my second book was on the nature of truth making. So it's like I say two different things and we can do them both. And I do. So I think there's two projects here and there's lots of interesting things to say about both of them. So my opposition here, as you note, is the philosopher that comes along and they see me like drive these things apart and they go, great, two separate things here. And then I say, like, over here, let's go with the deflationary story. And they go, great, love it. And then I go, let's go do some metaphysics. And they go, no. They're like, let's extract these things. And once we extract them, they're like, here's the good thing, but here's the bad thing. We can get rid of that. So it's a view that's like, well, once we kind of motivate this deflationary theory of truth, what we see, and they might say, what you just showed us is we don't have to do this correspondence truth making stuff anymore, right? Like, it's supposed to be like correspondence versus deflationism. And once you like go for deflationism, you can kind of throw out the correspondence. It was an overreaction. In correspondence theorists, they're talking about truth making and all that stuff. And like, we don't need that, right? The whole deflationist idea is we don't need that, right? But then, right. So this is where I'm like, but that's only because you're thinking of these things as having to be squished together. Once you once you extract them, when you're throwing away correspondence, you don't have to throw away all of truth making with it. So, but the attitude of these philosophers is like, well, look, once we've deflated truth, like, there isn't any real interesting metaphysics left to talk about. That's, I think, the general picture. So yeah, this is coming from people like Hugh Price and Amy Thomason, philosophers who style themselves as kind of I think neo-pragmatists, right? Where what is it to be a pragmatist? Great question, but it's something like resisting the metaphysical flavor of philosophy. Like pragmatists, they either want to like object to metaphysical projects in philosophy or at least like set them aside to go do something more practical, hence the name. So and Thomason has she's got a trilogy now of books that are kind of in this vein, several of which have like published after this paper that you've been brought up. So like there's a lot more to her views that are worth digging into and dealing with. But what I want to resist is this idea that like once you have a kind of lightweight view of truth, that metaphysical questions disappear or become uninteresting. And so that's the kind of view I really want to resist. I think part of the motivation for the view is something like, well, the metaphysical or ontological questions that remain here, they're all kind of like up to the sciences, right? So, take our sentence, snow is white. The correspondence theorist is like, what's the fact? What is this? And like facts in philosophy in this kind of corner are like these metaphysical entities that are like made up of a property and an entity that are kind of squished together in this kind of relation. Like the metaphysics gets complicated kind of fast. So you have a philosopher saying what makes it true that snow is white is like this particular kind of entity. And I think people in the Price and Thomason camp are like, this is not the metaphysicist's job. We can ask the question, what makes it true that snow is white? But that's kind of asking like, what makes snow white? And if you want to know what makes snow the color white, well, let's go talk to some physicists. Let's go talk to some people that study the science of color. Let's go talk to people that study like water and crystallization. Let's go talk to those guys because they can explain to us why snow is white. And what they're going to talk about when they give us that explanation is not going to be the stuff that like philosophers like Bertrand Russell or David Armstrong talked about. So there, we can answer these truth-making questions, but like these are just more scientific questions. So I think what they would say to me is like, look, even if you're right that being a deflationist about truth doesn't make metaphysics go away, what it does go away is any metaphysics that outstrips science. So yeah, you can still do metaphysics, but it's just like better handled by the scientists. I think that's what gets communicated here. It's like they think they're, you know, we metaphysicians have like a particular program of like a certain kind of metaphysics that's distinct and separate from what goes on in the natural sciences. And that project is what's being pursued here under the name of like, truth maker theory. And I think like so I think like that's an overreaction. I think, um, I think I mean, on my own view here is that like the sciences are deeply, deeply involved in metaphysics and making metaphysical commitments and metaphysical inferences and assumptions, and like in my view, like when a scientist is answering questions like what makes Snow White, like they are probably doing some truth maker theory in there. Like they're making views about what there has to be in the world in order for this stuff to be true. So I feel like a lot of what metaphysicians are interested in is part and parcel of good scientific practice. And I do think there are some metaphysical issues that like straightforward scientific practice kind of just doesn't get into. Um, so I mean, that's another whole topic we could get into as well. But even things like, if a scientist appeals to laws of nature to like explain why things are true, like, well, what are those? What is a law of nature? Um, that's a deeply metaphysical question. Probably part of the story about what makes it true that snow is white. I think laws of nature are relevant there. But what are those things? Well, that's asking a truth-making question. Like, what is this thing we need to have in the world? This law of nature. Like, what is that? You got to figure out like that's what we need in the world to make these claims true. But like, what's the law of nature? Great question. But that's like, that's a great philosophy, metaphysics of science 101 kind of question. So to me, it's like, yeah, I want to say, like, yeah, there's all kinds of metaphysics happening in the sciences, but it's deeply philosophical even there.
I take it then at that point too, just maybe for another example, it's sort of ceteris paribus is going to be like, you're thinking about, I don't know, something like murder is wrong. If that's, made true maybe by some sort of non-natural fact, right, where we're doing metaphysics there. Um, or, maybe you think that that's not the case, right? Maybe you think it's made true by some sort of natural fact, whatever your position is on metaethics. But if there are these facts that are made true, we have to sort of figure out like what sort of facts they are, or maybe they're not facts at all. So maybe do you think that's another example, maybe where like we still kind of have to do some philosophizing here to figure out what's going on there too, if there are these facts around us or whatever. Maybe fact is a word that I should stop using if it's really so metaphysically laden. But yeah, I mean, you can see the point.
Yeah, don't stop using the word fact. I think this is one of my pet peeves in philosophy. It's like fact means lots of different things, and I think we don't have all that. I don't think we actually struggle to figure out what we mean by each other, what each other means when we use that word in different contexts. But setting that aside, yeah. So I think like, I mean, the meta ethics case is dialectically very central right at this moment here because I think someone like Price in particular, I think he would make an argument similar to what I was saying earlier about like if you're this kind of traditional philosopher and you encounter this claim like apartheid is wrong, well, if you're a correspondence theorist, you gotta, well, if I think that's true, what's the thing in the world that it matches? Where's that wrongness fact out in reality? Like where is it? What is it? And so, my argument here was like, well, maybe don't sign up for correspondence theory yet, but like if you think it's true that apartheid is wrong, let's think about it. What is the right metaphysical story about that? And now we're doing meta ethics. So, but I think Price is like, yeah, like if we're this traditional kind of philosopher where every truth has to like match up with something in reality, you're gonna have it, life's gonna be hard. And like that's kind of a similar argument I was making earlier about, let's just do truth maker theory without correspondence front loaded into things. And Price is making a similar kind of argument. But then I but then I think at the end of the day, like people like Price are also interested in like expressivist views and where like there isn't really a fact, it's not even true exactly to say that apartheid is wrong. We're doing something else. We're not describing reality. We're doing something else. And they want to say we want to make room for theories that say the right thing to say here is that we're doing something else, something that a pragmatist theory is better suited for. And like, I mean, great. And what I want to say here is like, well, that's a view. You can have that view. My view is I don't know what the right meta ethical story is. My advice here is like, yeah, let's not be constraining our theorizing by like building in something like a correspondence of theorist of truth here. But let's not think that there's an open question here. If you think apartheid is wrong, then you think it's true that apartheid is wrong. Now let's talk about what might account for that fact. Is it, decrees from a divine being? Is it some kind of natural facts about human flourishing? Is it some kind of sui generis Morian fact? Is it, to me, like open season, let's go do some meta ethics. The fact that like we all can agree that it's true that apartheid is wrong if and only if apartheid is wrong. Great. Nevertheless, non-naturalistic Morian method ethics, naturalistic Cornell realist style meta ethics, an expressivist account, a relativist account, a kind of ideal observer account. To me, like this is such a clear case. It's like I agree. All that it takes for it to be true that apartheid is wrong is that apartheid be wrong. But apartheid's being wrong, what's the metaphysics you need for that? And just leaves the question completely open. And I feel like, and the most I think someone like Price or Thomason can say is, well, that opens the door for us to say, we don't, metaphysics is the wrong story here. Similarly to how I said, when you think about negative existentials, the wrong thing to say there is that they need a truth maker. And I think they might say the same thing in their case. But what I want to stress here is like, that's an option. That's a theoretical option. It's not forced on you just because you're a deflationist about truth. Being a deflationist about truth opens you up to exploring these non-metaphysical accounts, but it doesn't force the non-metaphysical accounts on you. And that's what I feel the kind of neo-pragmatist Thomason Price perspective is like, once you deflate truth, all substantive metaphysics kind of goes away real quick. And I think it doesn't go away real quick. There's a lot of choices and argumentation being made here. That it's not deflating, it's like deflationism about truth is just, it's so weak of a view. I in this paper we've talked about, I point out what I think is a kind of irony that people in the neo-pragmatist camp want to say like truth is a deflated notion. It doesn't have that much significance. And yet they think that theory has like all these anti-metaphysical implications. Like it's like, and I want to say like the deflationary theory of truth is so minimal. How can it possibly entail that all these other programs can't be right? Like I agree with you. It's a very, very thin, minimal notion. And because of that, it doesn't have all this anti-metaphysical implication in its wake. So it's ironic that they like deflate truth and then see it as having such great significance in terms of like broader philosophical fallout.
Right. Yeah, okay. So yeah, this whole thing then has been really sort of illuminating, right? I've been able to sort of climb the hill and see what you're seeing, I think. So yeah, that's really great. I think you've got to go in like 15 minutes, give or take. So this seems like a decent jumping off point. But before we go, I mean, thanks for being here, right? I mean, I know that it was 9:30 a.m. your time when we started, and you didn't have to come at all. So I always appreciate people that are willing and coming to try and help me and whoever watches the video to sort of understand, issues in philosophy. So yeah, I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. These are tough topics, and as you said, like they can get subtle pretty quick. But I think just because they're subtle doesn't mean like they aren't actually pretty big, significant kinds of things. So I think taking some time to just slowly walk through the disentangling, I think it's rewarding. So I appreciate the opportunity to do that.